Worldwide, in more and more regions, climatic changes are being observed that go far beyond previously known fluctuations. Natural catastrophes, extreme weather events, droughts, and a lack of drinking water force people to leave their habitats in many parts of the world. In Hamburg, around 100 scientists from around the world gathered to discuss the most recent research results on the significance of climate change as a trigger of migration.
This
century, we will see another rise in the global mean temperature beyond anything that mankind has seen so far. In the best case, it will be plus 2 degrees, but in the worst, it is possibly going to be 5 to 6 degrees. This will affect our natural resources all over the world that human societies depend on. The key question is how societies, individuals and communities are going to react to it. They can try to solve the problems in their homeland with the means at their disposal, but they might see themselves as being forced to leave their homes.
I think climate-induced migration is a problem or a challenge that it hasn't been addressed that much in the international level. So in no organizations or in only a few it's a topic, mainly on large NGOs. You will find the topic as something that they are treating. But if you look at the national level and also the international climate negotiations, there is still something that we have to push forward to bring it to this context.
There is still a lot of controversy about the extent to which migration could be aggravated by the advance of climate change. Some estimates predict that in the upcoming decades, hundreds of millions of people will have to flee from the consequences of climate change. Others warn of exaggeration or hysteria, as not all countries and regions are equally affected by climate change. Invited by the Climate Service Centre of the Helmholtz Institute Geesthacht and the Climate Campus of Hamburg University, leading researchers, experts from NGOs and decision makers were exchanging their experiences and findings on climate-induced migration. Initiatives on how to prevent climate-induced migration played a key role in the Hamburg conference.
Until now, these communities have been working separately. So you have the climate modeling community, the demographic community, the urbanization community, the people that deal with rural sociology, and it's the time to bring them all together to get the results and insights from the different community to tackle a problem together.
What is happening in Laos right now is that the number of extreme events are increasing. So the number of flooding episodes are increasing, and it has affected a lot of households, whether in upland and lowland areas. So there's a phenomenon of flash flooding, which is affecting a lot of households as well. At the same time, there's also this infrastructure-related flooding, which is sort of a slow onset flooding, which affects a lot of households in lowland areas in Laos.
It's really a problem in Ghana because you find farmers, you find fishermen who are having to grapple with low crop yields in the case of the farmers and low fish harvests in the case of the fishermen. And that has become a problem, and it is now when you go to the northern parts of the country, to the transitional zone, farmers are really grappling with this issue, and there is a possibility that some of them may be trying to move to elsewhere to find better living conditions. So that's what we are trying to research on. But it has not been easy because you realize that migration has been going on since time immemorial. And so for you to disentangle the reasons for migration from environmental or climatic causes, it's a big problem.
The primary activity of the people in the island is as a fishermen, so they really depend on the weather. So now it's very difficult to them to predict the season. So it's become very difficult to them to go fishing and catch, and that's give a big influence to their livelihoods.
So I'm really interested in the glacier issue in Bolivia, yes, because in Bolivia and more generally in the Andes, but most in Bolivia, glaciers are retreating at a very, very fast rate. I mean, during the last 30 years, Bolivian glaciers lost 50% of their volume, which is huge. So the problem is that sooner or later there's going to be a lack of water, a very high problem of water availability for rural areas where I'm studying. I'm studying in some watershed, in communities living close from the mountains, but also for the cities, because talking about migration, people are circulating, people are involved in mobility process between rural areas and urban areas, but both areas are affected by the same problems. In this case, glacier issues are affecting the entire area, so causing very high problems of water availability. Problems.
So, for example, in the case of Niger, in the Sahel region, we talked to farmers and to nomads who have been highly affected by climatic problems, seasonal shifts. So, for example, people cannot plan anymore. They have adapted themselves to a fact that, for example, the rain season would start at a certain time, but now the rain season has shifted, becomes later, and at the same time the rain days have also decreased. And this has negative implications on the livelihoods of the people, and therefore they have to look for alternative livelihoods, or even to migrate to another village, another region, or in the worst case even cross the borders and go to a neighbor country.
So the federal, state, and tribal governments in Alaska have tried to use the traditional methods of protecting communities in place, like seawalls, but the seawalls have not been able to protect the community. So in one community called Kivalina, which is on the northwest coast of Alaska, the government spent several $1 million, 15 million, I believe, to build a seawall in 2006. And on the day of the dedication ceremony, when there were congressional members present, a storm came in and destroyed the seawall. And then the year later, in 2007, another storm came in and 3/4 of the people in the community needed to evacuate. They then built another seawall with different materials, but they're only saying that that seawall will be able to protect people in the place where they live for another 10 to 15 years, and that was completed in 2009.
The research data and results from different projects clearly show that migration triggered by climate change is going to pose enormous challenges for people, governments and administrations in the future. Today, the exchange between academic fields is still in its early stages and needs to be intensified in order to support decision makers in politics and society in their search for viable solutions. We need to develop our capacities to deal with the problem now, while climate change has still not crossed certain thresholds. This also means that it is necessary to acknowledge the legitimacy of climate-induced migration. One should refrain from developing defensive mechanisms like the use of military force in order to protect national borders against refugees. In my opinion, this is absolutely counterproductive. So we need to develop our capacities to protect people and to strengthen communities.
And here we face a gap in research, a gap in policy making, and a gap in normative frameworks. So this is the reason why it is important to address, because this is definitely an increasing reason why people are moving worldwide, and the numbers keep increasing year after year. And the policy framework is not right, the legal framework is not right, the research framework is not right either. So we have a lot to catch up on.
If governments recognize climate-induced migration as a fact, then this will mean that the governments in the north will have to support the populations moving around the world due to climate-induced migration, because we will have, in the north, we will have to compensate the south countries for the emission of CO2.
We can exchange results improve our methods, and look at different places that we can compare. So that when we sit down with the decision makers, when we try to find resources for the affected people to help themselves, it is based on the best data available, on the best analysis available, and we can be absolutely certain that if we are trying to transfer lessons from one location to another, we know what can work and what cannot work. If we cause more problems than we solve, we should not be doing this work.
At the beginning, it's almost a consciousness raising that has to take place so that climate change gets on the migration agenda, but also migration gets on the climate change agenda.